Chairperson. Just before that, I would want to refer to the decision for transparency's sake in case it is raised in the decision, in the discussion about the extraordinary summit decision on Africa's relationship with the ICC. Just to reassure you that the leaders in one of the paragraphs said, reiterates, in accordance with the Constitutive Act of the African Union, the AU's unflinching commitment to fight impunity, promote human rights and democracy, the rule of law and good governance in the country. And then they elaborated a lot and decided that to safeguard the constitutional order, stability and integrity of member states, no charge shall be commenced or continued before any international court tribunal against any serving head of AU head of state or government or anybody acting or entitled to act capacity during the term of office. But I would want to urge you to look at the website of the African Union Commission, the African Union in general, to get a full picture of that decision and some of the statements from our leaders who posted there. As the conclusion of this part of the panel, I would like to invite the Chairperson.
So I won't need to say a lot, but I've just raised a few issues around democracy. I think President Mbassador said almost everything about democracy, but I just want to emphasize the issue of inclusiveness. Now, usually when people talk about inclusiveness, they talk about inclusion of different racial, ethnic, sometimes religious groups. But inclusiveness must, by definition, also mean women, also mean youth, and also mean people living with disability. So those are the few things that I thought I should just add on democracy. But also democracy, in my view, cannot be a one-size-fits-all, because each country has to address the fault lines that exist in their country, and so fashion democracy to make sure that it addresses those fault lines. And I also just want to speak a bit on corruption. I think corruption should be eradicated wherever it exists. But when we look at corruption, we must fight the person who gets corrupted, who's bribed, but also the person who bribes. Not so long ago, in some countries that are developed, bribing was actually rewarded with tax rebate because it was said to be business facilitation. So I think we should really fight corruption wherever it is, in whatever form. Now I want to say a bit about justice and the judiciary, since it's talked about, especially around this issue of the ICC and the African leaders. First, I think impunity is one thing that the African leaders voluntarily decided they don't want. It was their decision, and they put it in the Constitutive Act of the African Union voluntarily. TCHAPE is the only organization that has put it in its own Constitutive Act, without any coercion from anyone. Secondly, if you look at the ICC, and you look at the different regions, probably Africa is the biggest region in the ICC. And those leaders also, those countries, went into the ICC voluntarily because they were against impunity. But I also want to say, maybe just like capitalism that was not designed for us, we must also look at the judiciary and look at the African approach to judicial and maybe the other approach. And I'm talking here from a lay person's view because I'm not a lawyer. I'm just not a lawyer. So, but I'm looking at it just from an ordinary person's view. One, I think the judiciary, justice in most African communities, because our African communities are based not on the individual, they are based on the family and on communities and then on the nation. So when they look at justice, you have to have an element of punitive, okay, but more importantly, finding common ground for those who have been fighting, warring, but also it's more about restorative justice rather than just purely punitive. And I think that's why if I were to take the example of my own country, there's no one in this world who is in the ICC, even though apartheid was a crime against humanity. Because we sought to restore peace in our country, we sought to apply restorative justice rather than just punitive justice. That's why we will never be chasing people who practice apartheid until they are 90, 100. So I think we should also just look at that in terms of the African context. And I also want to also say justice should also be fair. It should not be vindictive. And also when we judge African countries and the decisions they've just taken, we must also look at the rest of the world. There are lots of countries that we take very highly on human rights, who are not even part of the ICC. But Africans became part of the ICC, 34 countries voluntarily. So I just thought I should make that point. And I also want to look at the issue of human rights. Again, I want to look at it from a layperson's view because I'm not a professional in terms of human rights. But for me, the human rights should be broader than what we're talking about. It should be a right of every child to go to school. Why aren't we emphasizing that? It should be a right of every child to have access to health, to have a roof over their head. It should be a right of everyone to dignity. It should be a right of everyone to be protected, to have water, to have food. Some of these rights, because I don't know why we want to put them aside, and sometimes we call them humanitarian issues. These are not humanitarian issues, these are rights. And in our constitution, actually, we have them as rights embedded in our constitution. And the head of human rights here can attest to that, because she's South African. But here, we look at rights so narrowly. It's okay for children to be ignorant, to be hungry, to be ravaged by disease. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a right, it's a human right. And that's the approach that we should take. And of course, we should also respect and manage diversity. Because sometimes diversity is not respected. And I'll use a very interesting example. One time, my kids came back from school from South Africa very upset they'd been told that for the winter uniform, they need to buy stockings that are skin color. Skin color. So of course they went and brought brownish stockings. And when they got to school, they were told, no, we told you skin color. Of course the principal and most of the teachers that time were white. So they said, but they are skin color. They said, no, there should be just one skin color. And for that principal, skin color was her skin color, not the kids' skin color. And so diversity is very important in its management. And then they were told they can't keep their African hair long because you see, you should just be able to brush it flat, like this. Now, no amount of brushing the African hair flat like this. And so there was a huge issue. Why? Because more than just managing race, managing diversity, there was also an element of racism. And so these things sometimes do go together. And managing the economy and growing our economy and our development, I think we should do it our way. We must find our way. Because neither the way of Marx or the way of capitalism might necessarily be always good for us. I think we should find our way, as long as it works in terms of making sure that our people are taken out of poverty, they have education. Because if we don't do it our way, earlier we were told how structural adjustment messed our countries up. Countries were told they mustn't spend public money on education, on health, and so on. Of course, those who were saying already had done that before, and now there are people who are in a position to buy their own health services and their own, pay for their own education at school. Ours are not at that point. So I think we must look at things our way and do them in the way that is best for our own people and our own situation and our own needs. And of course, we should also be allowed to respect our culture. And culture, of course, being dynamic. And we ourselves should be able to differentiate culture that is relevant today and that will take us forward, and culture that we must shut down, that is not taking us forward anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, for providing the context.
I can say that it is an ongoing discussion about how do we best communicate, whether it's radio, whether it's TV, how do we link up with the national channels in the different countries. So that's there's an ongoing discussion about that, and hopefully it will come to some fruition. Uganda, I think it was mainly comments about the need to acquire power and strength, about doing things ourselves, and for ourselves, and coming with ideas ourselves and not doing that in place of other people's ideas. I think that those comments are welcome. And then from Sierra Leone, I think it was also comments about making sure that women are involved in every human endeavor, and that would be not only good for the women, but good for the continent and the world. And of course, she commented on the ownership of the development in Africa, and that partners can come and partner, but the ownership should be Africa's ownership. So, and I think she left a very interesting challenge to all of you, to all of us, that every day, whatever we do, we must always be asking ourselves, how is this contributing to a peaceful, united, prosperous Africa? So I think if every African, wherever they are, they can ask that question in whatever they do, we will indeed get to a prosperous, peaceful Africa very quicker. So that was a challenge to all of us. The question raised by Nigeria is a very important but very difficult question about religion, because I think this is also part of managing diversity in our societies. And I think in most countries, religion is not part of the state. We have secular states. But it's important to manage the diversity of religion in a way that religions coexist peacefully. And it's something that has to be continuously discussed, continuously attended to, because generally in Africa, different communities and different religions have always coexisted peacefully. It's a new phenomenon that there is now strife and violence inter-religious. So I think we need to work on it, all of us, to make sure we go back to a position where we can coexist peacefully. And then he also asked about a single visa. And then I'll also maybe answer the question together with the questions around the questions around integration and so on. You see, the AU, OAU first, the AU decided that the building blocks for integration are the regional economic communities. The regional economic communities must show leadership and must then be the blocks for integration. That's where integration must first take place and then link up until we can integrate the whole continent. Now, I think it would be much easier and better if the visa, the one visa, were to exist in each REC first, and then across the RECs, which means then across the continent. But it's an important element of integration. We can't avoid it for too long. It's something we must really address. Because it's going to be critical in the years to come. But also, the AU has begun to, amongst our countries, to look at registration, civic registration. Because a lot of countries do not do civic registration. Besides the fact that how are we going to plan for anything, for school, for health, for job, for anything, if we do not register our citizens at birth, if we do not know how many of our citizens are born this year and how many have gotten married. I think it's very important to do civic registration. And as well, when we have civic registration, it makes it easier then for citizens to move. Because if I come to Nigeria and I say I'm South African, and the South African government has never registered me, doesn't know whether I am or I'm not, it just makes it much more difficult. So, for the first time in 2010, the ministers in charge of civic registration met for the first time in Africa. They met in Addis, and last year they met in South Africa. Next year they are meeting in Cote d'Ivoire every 2 years. But we need to encourage our countries to give them budget to be able to do it, because it's an integral part of facilitating movements amongst us, besides making it easy to play. The advice that you are giving to ambassadors, I think they've heard it. They live here in Geneva, and I think the chair of the AU, the chair of the African ambassadors, the representative of the AU, I'm sure they'll discuss what we've done. And I think indeed NGOs can add value in what we do as governments. So I will leave it to them to take up the challenge. Then there's the question of that was raised about the Millennium Conference, the NGOs and their participation in the AU, and about NEPAD. Well, the way the question was asked, it was difficult for me, because I neither know a new wife nor an old wife. But I think, let me just say a few things about NEPAD as I see them, not from the perspective of a new or an old wife, but just, I think NEPAD was a very good idea about just drawing up a blueprint about Africa's development. But my greatest criticism, first of all, of NEPAD, is that we drew up a plan for ourselves, but we handed it over to other people to fund. How does it work? It works like this. Nothing happens when you do that. And I think it's a lesson that we should learn. Even with the older ones, I mean the Abuja Treaty, or plan of action, it said that we must begin to be self-reliant, because aid cannot be the mainstay of our development. Was saying we're not shutting ourselves out of the world, but the world must assist, must not put the first penny for our development. But how far have we gone from that? And my view, no amount of plans, no matter how good they are, if we do not find resources to implement them, then they will be implemented at the pace of development aid. And we cannot take charge of their implementation and decide the pace and the strength at which we implement them. So that's one mistake I think we did with NEPAD. Maybe I'll just talk about that only and leave the rest. And the question of migration and the Institute for Remittances, I think once the Institute for Remittances is established, which I hope will be soon, because it had been agreed. Now they were looking at where it should be located. The member states had shortlisted 2 countries, I think Kenya and Mauritius. And now they were saying the 2 countries must have some negotiations. I don't know whether that has been concluded. I will hear at the next summit. But once it's done, I think it would be important to discuss in terms of what cooperation would be established. As for investing the funds in productive sectors, well, first I think it's important that that institute should reduce the cost of sending remittances. In terms of investing those funds, well, I don't know, because those funds tend to belong to individuals. They are being sent to individual families. So how, unless we're saying we take some 0.0% and put it together and invest, but generally, as far as I know, those remittances are going to different individuals. But we can discuss with the people who send them whether they can take $1 or whatever for investment. That would be a discussion that we can have. I think the question of facilitating a transfer of equipment and technology, I think individual countries, of course, as the AU, we can also talk to member states, but individual countries should indeed facilitate that, so that they are received tax-free as long as they are going to assist people and they are not going to be sued. That should be difficult. The last question or comments around growth without employment is true. You see, that's why we were also talking a lot about adding value. Because if you don't manufacture, you don't add value, you will only have the primary jobs that extract whatever you are selling. Beyond that, there are no jobs. Those jobs are created where you are sending what you are selling. So it's important that we add value to what we extract so that we can create more jobs and get even more revenue for what we are extracting. But also, capitalism itself, that's why I was saying earlier, maybe we should do it our way. Because in our case, we need labor-intensive industries, and we need to make sure that we employ our people. We are seeing now more and more of these multinationals using robots instead of people. Now, where are you going to get jobs if you are using robots instead of people? Of course, robots would be much cheaper because once you have created them, maintenance is low, you don't pay them salaries, you don't pay them pensions, you don't give them medical aid. So in our case, we need to employ people. And we need to say to people who invest in our countries, they can't come and manufacture cars using only robots. And then there's artificial growth, but there's no real income going to people because there are no jobs. And the standard of living of the people is not improved either, but there is growth. So these are some of the things that I think we need to look at and address. And of course, the issue of land that is being bought, or sometimes we use the word grabbed, is a very important issue. Because even though we say 60% of arable land that is not still available is in Africa. We must always say that statement and link it with the fact that Africa has a growing population, will be doubling in 2050. And not just leave it at 60% and then allow people to buy. Come 2025, come 2050, we will have no land to feed the population that we have. So it's very important when we look at this, because the others are saying it because they want to come and buy. And some of them, even when they buy this land, they grow food. And when they grow it, they take it lock, stock, and barrel to their country as though it has been grown in their country. No processing, no value addition. They don't even sell it to the locals. They just take it like that. And I think we must be careful as Africans not to end up with land located in our geographic space but not belonging to us. And if we're not careful, the young people will grow, they will have no food, they will have no schooling because we have given up our land. And instead of them being an asset, they'll be a big liability because they will fight, young people. And they will be right to fight if there is no land, but there is land here, but it no longer belongs to us. It has been sold off to across the seas, and we are not able to produce food for them. So these are the things that we should look at now and not wait until that time. And even if people sell land, they shouldn't sell it, maybe lease it for short periods, because if you lease it for long periods, the time will come when you need it and you don't have it. So these are the things that, and then of course, the strategy to counter the balance of power slowly by slowly. Well, I think if we educate our people, they innovate, they get jobs, we have development, we modernize our continent, we manufacture, and our economies grow, then we will have power. But if we don't send our kids to school, we don't do all the necessary things, and we can't even look after ourselves, we go with only begging for aid and we are not self-sufficient, what power are we going to? There's no balance of power there. Because if you can't look after yourself, then you depend on somebody else. You can't then say you are countering the power of that person. I'm just being frank with you. Yeah. So I think if we do all those right things and trade amongst ourselves, develop our continent, be a modern continent with modern infrastructure, that's how we can counter power in the world. That's why we can then play a meaningful role in world affairs. As for the trade laws, I think as we integrate, obviously we will need to harmonize some of the laws at the reg level and at the continental level, because when we have free trade and so on, it means we need to harmonize the laws. Also, to accelerate intra-African trade, we need to harmonize the custom laws and so on, so that trucks and trains don't stop at borders for days on end, because it means then we're not competitive. So these are the things that we will have to look at from time to time. And the question of visa, I had sort of answered it. And then traveling across Europe, I travel across Africa using either the African passports that I have or using the laser passport. There are very few countries, northern countries that don't sometimes allow us, but generally we do travel across as officials of the African Union. We don't need visas when we go to all these countries getting our work. But what I think we are talking about is beyond us officials. How and when are we going to get to the general? So those are some of the things that we have to talk to member states also, because even where there are protocols, member states are very reluctant to ratify them. So we need to encourage them. We accept the comments from Mexico, and we hope to increase and to strengthen our relations as Africa with Mexico and individual countries. EU, I wasn't quite sure about this Afro-European organization. We do have a dialogue with the EU as Africa. But if we are talking about an organization, Afro-European organization, that's up to member states. And we'll have to define what that organization will do, why we need it, what will be its objectives, and so on. And then at the time, I'm not sure.
Golden Jubilee celebrations of the OAU days. This is an historical moment of reflection of our past and most importantly, Africa's future. The OAU played an important role in ending colonialism and apartheid from Africa. The AU is an important continental body to forge and execute common agenda for African people. Africa's political independence is not followed by economic independence. The debt crisis, the imposition of structural adjustment programs, the lack of democratic governance resulted in lost decades. The African leaders have renewed their commitment to bring about peace, security, and development, particularly since the beginning of the 21st century. The transformation of the OAU to the African Union, the launching of Nepal, and sectoral strategies and programs are important African initiatives which heralded the era of African Renaissance. Since 2000, African economies have grown. Africa is attracting more foreign direct investment, increasing its external trade. Poverty is decreasing. Africa is rising, and Africa is open for business. Peace and security is improving, and African solutions for African problems are bearing fruits. This is indeed a period of optimism as Africa is becoming one of the global economic growth force. However, this is not also a time of complacency. Rather, it is an opportune time that should be seized by all Africans. Governments, civil society, and the diaspora to sustain the economic growth in Africa and achieve inclusive and sustainable structural transformation. It's our common responsibility to redouble our efforts to reclaim African rightful place on the global stage. Africa is well positioned to be a dynamic global force by exploiting its rich resources, both human and natural resources. The struggle for development continues in the area areas of agriculture, industrialization, and economic diversification, democracy, good governance, rule of law, infrastructure, social and physical infrastructure, regional integration. This transformation agenda requires a holistic approach in a new path of development, including the reshaping of the role of the developmental state. We still should break the vicious circle of independence and chart a new path for Africa's renaissance. It was also pointed out that good governance, development, peace and security are important objectives in themselves and are essential means of achieving the well-being of the African community. The importance of democracy in relation to governance was also emphasized. A broad definition, of course, the President was also referred to the question of national consensus, national cohesion, and governance, and a broader definition of democracy, which incorporates inclusiveness, underscore. This broader context of democracy, inclusion in terms of diversity, which takes into account the rights and welfare of women, youth, persons with disabilities, was underlined. The need to protect the concept of human rights, which should include all human rights, including the right to live, and with emphasis on economic, social, and cultural rights, was highlighted. The need for Africa to manage its economic development in such a way that it responds to Africa's needs and aspirations is also underscored. It was also recognized that Africa has made significant progress in the last decades in many spheres. Achievements by Africans, wherever they are witnessed, should be appreciated and encouraged. For example, Africa is the only continent, or the African Union is the only organization which has provisions in its Constitutive Act to fight against impunity and non-difference, and the right to intervene in events of gross violations of human rights, such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. We should maintain a broader conception of justice, which includes equity and fairness, rather than simply focusing on retribution. The recent decision of the African Union Summit with regard to relations with ICC should be understood in that light. The African group in Geneva is well positioned to contribute to these noble objectives of Africa's renaissance. Africans are the masters of their destiny. What is required is an enabling international economic, financial, and trade arrangements that put development at the center. It is our duty that the negotiating outcomes in critical areas such as trade are in line with Africa's development objectives. As Madam Chairperson said, in line with the priorities set by the Union. We should also work with African civil society as a response to some of the questions. We should also work with African civil society and diaspora. We should collaborate with our development partners